think we're in our third hour. So yay, milestone. Thanks to everyone who's come by so far. Even if you've come and gone, thanks so much. Happy Earth Day to everyone. It's a beautiful day here in Germany, and I can see it's beautiful from the sun shining in my window, but not going out there. No. Gonna shelter in place. I'm Angela Fobbs, the chair of the Global Black Caucus, and I'm with.
And I'm Ann Hesse. I chair the Global Women's Caucus. And I'd like to introduce our next guest. And I'm so proud and so lucky that this woman came into my life. I put out a call for a Women's Caucus environment team, a climate action team. And this amazing woman, Naomi Ages, answered the call and is leading our Women's Caucus climate action team. She has a lot of wonderful experience. And Angela, do you have her bio up at the moment?
Yes, I do.
Then maybe Angela can read a little bit about Naomi so you can be as impressed as I am.
Yes, Naomi Ages is a recent transplant from Washington, D.C. to Oslo, Norway, and a relative newcomer to Democrats Abroad. Naomi worked in a variety of roles in Greenpeace USA and Greenpeace International, with a focus on climate and energy law and policy, and U.S. political strategy. She now works as the head of sustainability for a Norwegian company, and she's looking forward to when she can organize and mobilize in person again. Without further ado, welcome, Naomi.
Hi, thanks. Can everybody hear and see me, maybe? Yes.
Yes, we can see you. Great. Welcome.
Welcome, Naomi.
Hi, and hi, Angela. So, hi, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to do this. Welcome to a Green New Deal and a Just Recovery. I'm really excited to talk to you about this on the back of the video and discussion that we just had, and hopefully won't be repetitive, but it will be interesting and inspiring. So I have a slide deck that I believe I sent to Angela. So if we're ready to go, I can jump into that.
Yes, let me just stop my video and mute my mic, and it's all yours.
Okay,
just tell me when you're ready for the next slide, okay?
Got it. Don't see it. There we go. Okay. So, Green New Deal and a Just Recovery. So I thought I would set the stage as we begin here and say that I know, and we know, that the COVID-19 pandemic is a world-altering tragedy situation. And it's exposing what many of us in Democrats Abroad and in our daily lives know to be true, which is that the injustices and inequalities and systems that enabled the crisis that is now unfolding are sort of laid bare. And that's what we're facing right now. But just as polluting industries, monopolistic corporations are trying to get everything possible out of the government bailout or recovery stimulus from this tragedy, there's also a tremendous opportunity for Democrats, for progressives, for anybody who wants a different world to bring that into being and to reimagine society to be more sustainable and more just. And this has a through line from the Green New Deal to the stimulus and recovery programs that come out of our governments in the months to come. So I want to hopefully come out of this discussion and this presentation with us having a better idea of the future that we want and how we get it. So you can go to the next slide, please. This isn't exactly an outline because it's not entirely linear, but this is just an idea of what you'll hopefully get in the next hour, which is that we can connect with each other and get to know each other and our shared values, learn about the policies underneath the Green New Deal, the programs, what it is and what is not. What is a green and just recovery as we talk about COVID-19 and what's to come, and how we make this happen. By that, I mean what inspires you to take action and how you can take that action for now digitally and hopefully in person in the weeks and months to come, especially leading up to the election. Next slide. I thought you might want to know a little bit about me. I know Angela read a little bit of my bio, but it's always nice to put a little background to who you're hearing from. So I'm based in Oslo, as I said, and I vote in New Jersey, which is where I was not born, but raised. So I'm a very proud Jersey girl. I have been a climate campaigner, a political strategist. I'm also a recovering lawyer, currently the head of sustainability in Norway. And the picture, just to give you an idea a little bit, I'm also very more and more I focus on direct action, and that is from a protest in the Senate against Rex Tillerson being confirmed as Secretary of State. So obviously direct action, not always successful, but very worth doing. And I encourage you to think about how you can do it even digitally. And the other reason that I might be here is I'm too new to say no to Anne when she asks for volunteers to take on things like this, but I'm happy that she did ask me. So the last thing, my Twitter is up there because that's where I do the majority of my political analysis. Some might say ranting, and I try to be humorous as well. So if you'd like to follow me there, I invite you to. But moreover, I think that if you want to get involved with the Women's Climate Action Team, if you want to get involved with Democrats Abroad, we would be thrilled to have you. So please get in touch. You don't have to be a woman, you just have to be a person who cares about people and the planet. Next slide. This is one of my favorite quotes about people who care, and it's from Dr. Seuss's environmental parable, The Lorax. If you haven't read it, or you have budding environmental activist children or young people in your lives, or even for yourselves, I encourage you to get a copy from the library and remind yourself that unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not. It's a wonderful book. Next slide. And so I thought we would start off. We did this a little bit before, but some new people have joined. And maybe we could have a little discussion about what's in your Green New Deal. This, if you can't see because the GIF is quite small, but it's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez at a Green New Deal rally with a sign that says, "Good jobs for a livable future." And I think that's a good distillation of a big piece of the Green New Deal. But I thought it might be nice for us to get to know each other and what we think would be in our version of a Green New Deal. So if people could put it into the chat box so everybody can see it, and maybe read and respond to each other for a couple minutes.
It's nice to be here today. I'm just so amazed, Anne. First, I want to say I am not a foraging expert. I just like
The next space is the video. Is that correct?
That is. I just wanted to take a couple minutes for people to have a moment to write down what's in their Green New Deal.
Oh, okay. Yes, if you could write that into the chat, what you think, what's going to be good for you. What do you think the Green New Deal for you is?
Maybe something you saw in the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez video, something you heard today already, something you've been thinking about, something in the country that you live in, just so we can see what each other value.
You can write it in the chat, or you can write it in the Q&A box. By the way, Naomi, there was a question earlier that we couldn't address, and it was, could you compare the Green New Deal to the Paris Accord? Is that possible?
I will answer this in more detail later throughout the presentation, but I will say the similarities, I would say, is that both are a framework. The Paris ideal is not a legally binding document. It invites countries to put their contributions to emissions reductions in it, and suggests some goals and some guidelines for how that should happen. The Green New Deal, likewise, is a framework for policy. It itself is not a policy, and I think both are the ideal of what we want, and it's up to us with the bones on what we can have. Now, the Green New Deal is focused domestically. The Paris Agreement is an international document, but the Paris Agreement is focused on emissions, specifically greenhouse gas emissions. The Green New Deal talks about the entire system. The Green New Deal is about fundamentally changing the economy, every aspect of how we live, work, travel, eat. So I would say the Green New Deal is broader, and I think possibly more transformative if it is achieved.
We have a few comments in the chat box from Dan Bubin. I'd like the Green New Deal that makes federal guidelines for renewable portfolio standards, as well as more transparency for wind, solar, and renewable transmission projects. Sorry. We have one from Katie, expanding public transportation, especially in the Western U.S., and one from Will, environmental inequality, reparations, and mediation for those disproportionately affected by the environmental harms of the past.
These are great. And the good news is that they can all be put within a Green New Deal, or the set of policies that would come under a Green New Deal. So these are the types of ideas, programs that hopefully we can bring into being, not in 5 months, but maybe if we put our work together for the next couple decades. Yes, exactly. That environmental inequality touches sort of all corners of the economy, and the Green New Deal starts to address that. So maybe this is a good time to go to the video that I included in the next slide, which is, it's an explainer that Vox put together a couple months after the Green New Deal was released. And it makes the point, importantly, that the Green New Deal is a resolution. It is not a law, it is not a policy, it is a framework. And the video gets at a lot of the politics around the Green New Deal, which I think it's important to touch on, but not get distracted by, which often happens in the media in the US, why the Green New Deal will or won't pass, will you have to give up your hamburgers. So I wanted to show the video and then move past the politics.
Okay, I'm just gonna mute and show the video. Give me a second.
This is a group of the world's best climatologists. Every few years, they gather to tell us what's happening to our warming planet. In 2018, they had some news.
It's very clear that half a degree matters.
This is a chart of how much the global temperature has gone up since we discovered fossil fuels. For a long time, scientists said that we should try to stay under this line, 1.5 degrees Celsius. But that really, we'd be okay if we ended up below this line, 2 degrees. Now they were saying that wasn't quite right, that we're not safe in this zone, and that hitting this line will mean a spike in mass migration, wildfires, deadly heat stress, and it's going to cost us
trillions of dollars, millions of lives, irreversible, forever changes that cannot be undone in centuries.
That's what happens if we get warming to stop here. And right now, we're on track to go way past that.
If action is not taken, it will take the planet into an unprecedented climate future if we compare it to what has happened during all of human evolutionary history.
We don't have a plan for this. So a group of American activists started to make one. They recruited a congresswoman and a senator to turn it into a congressional resolution. It's the first step of a plan that has mostly yet to be written. It's called the Green New Deal. And inside, there's something we might not want to hear. This is the Green New Deal resolution. It's only 14 pages. And to understand what's in it, it's important to understand what's not.
It is not a bill. It's not legislation. It's not a policy proposal. It's not anything that you could pass and make law.
This is my colleague, David Roberts. Dave's written a lot about the Green New Deal, and he says the 14-page resolution is just a first step.
The idea was, what's our shared understanding of the problem and what's necessary to solve it?
The Green New Deal contains basically two big ideas. The first is this question of what we need to do to solve the impending climate crisis. The Green New Deal says what climate scientists say. We need to completely stop burning fossil fuels as much as technologically feasible.
So that means things like rethinking vehicles, energy efficiency standards for buildings, changing the ways that we make steel and concrete.
That's Rihanna Gunn Wright. She's part of the think tank that came up with the Green New Deal.
Policy director of New Consensus.
Rihanna writes policy, and she likes to rattle off things that moving away from fossil fuels will entail.
Moving to electric vehicles, make that home energy efficient. The food that you buy will be grown locally.
The Green New Deal requires building a lot of new things, the things to power the world without fossil fuels. And that'll create new jobs, new industries, an entire new economy. But Rihanna also emphasizes that this is going to inflict a cost.
It's going to be a massive undertaking because we're actually asking, how do we rethink the ways that we use energy in our society.
A key principle of the Green New Deal is that it's too late to incrementally move away from fossil fuels. It has to happen quickly and dramatically. Or as Dave puts it,
people don't seem to get zero emissions means zero oil business, means zero natural gas business, no coal business, no internal combustion engine auto business. Like, the number zero means it all has to go.
Here's what decarbonizing will do. When we rip out fossil fuels from the economy, people are going to lose their jobs. And that means they'll lose their healthcare, maybe their homes. But the Green New Deal also has a second part. And this part acknowledges that transitioning Americans away from fossil fuels is a huge and difficult ask, especially at a time when so many live in economic uncertainty.
How can we go to the American people and say, I sure hope you aren't one of the people who loses a job, because then you might die like sick on the street. Good luck. Now will you sign my bill?
This is the contradiction the Green New Deal describes. It's the part we may not want to hear. That we need to take action, and also that taking action will cause pain. Imagine you're a coal worker. If the US decarbonizes, you are going to suffer. So the second part is a set of promises for how Americans will be protected during the transition away from fossil fuels.
Jobs guarantee, public employment, universal health care, education and training.
The basic elements of economic freedom that ought to be promised and due to every citizen of the richest country in the world.
And these promises aren't just for protecting coal workers. They're meant to keep all inequality from getting even worse during the transition. Because think about what direction wealth and power usually flow in when new things get built. It's the communities with the most political clout who decide where things can and can't be built. Wealthy corporations jump in to build those projects, and the good jobs go to the people who can afford to get trained for them.
The folks who have the fewest barriers will be the ones who benefit the most, and you're just going to see a replication of the issues that we have now.
In other words, anyone who's historically missed out on those benefits, especially the poor and people of color, could end up even worse off. So the Green New Deal says we should rebuild the American economy in a way that allows opportunity to flow more fairly.
The Green New Deal is about, while we have this chance, why don't we think about that proactively to change it in the ways that people have been calling for it to be changed for generations at this point?
So the first part of the Green New Deal is a set of goals to avoid a global disaster. The second part says we should do it in a way that helps ordinary Americans come out better on the other side. And that's it. That's all that's in these 14 pages. It's just a first step. And now, Rihanna's job is to figure out how to go from this 14-page resolution to an actual Green New Deal, a roadmap for what government needs to do next. And their goal is that if Democrats win power in 2020, there's a plan ready to execute. For now, though, the Green New Deal is just asking our leaders to acknowledge the scale of the problems we face. So, how's that going?
This disastrous plan would be a massive government takeover
that would stifle innovation.
Wasteful and reckless spending.
Rather than setting realistic goals,
we would go from about 94 million cows to 0 cows.
That resolution will not pass the Senate because there's no way to pay for it.
Destructive, socialist daydream.
The Green New Deal is a long shot. But right now, it's also the only plan that acknowledges what we know is coming.
What is the world that we want? What is the country that we want? And how do we get there? And how do we get there in a way that is just? And how do we get there in a way that stabilizes the climate and heals our planet? Because if we don't do that, then there will be no paradigm because there will be nothing to fight for.
Okay, we can go to the next slide then.
All right, just 1 second.
Okay, So what the video starts to explain and what I want to talk about a little, and I like to give credit to the term intersectionality to Kimberly Crenshaw, who's a lawyer, scholar, and critical race theorist who originally used it, and it's been adopted widely among progressives and among talking about policies like the Green New Deal. So I know you're not supposed to just read text from the screen, and I'm going to attempt to avoid doing it while you can hopefully read the text. But the essence of the Green New Deal and the people and organizations who conceptualized and wrote it and are in the movement behind it believe that addressing climate change is simply not enough. If you do not acknowledge and address the systems that contribute to climate change, like an exploitative fossil fuel-based economy, and you do not address the disproportionate impacts of climate change, like flooding on people who don't have the resources to recover from it, then the policy just simply isn't good enough. The Green New Deal seeks to address those systems and root causes that are making things worse. Next slide. So we've established the Green New Deal is not itself a law or policy, but it's an umbrella and framework for a number of policies. And those policies are aimed at address those intersectional issues that we just talked about. So this list, if you can read it maybe while I talk, and I'll give you a couple minutes after I finish, is drawn from the article that inspired the AOC video that you watched, A Message from the Future. It was an article in The Intercept. It's excellent. I can drop the link into the chat when this is done. And this list, as the author and the video point out, is not exhaustive. But I thought it's a good exercise to read through it and just see what surprises you in that. What do you think is missing? What did you think, oh, wow, I didn't even know that could be part of the Green New Deal? And so I'll go first and say that I was thrilled to see trade policy included. It's something that I have worked on at various points in my career, but it never gets the attention as an environmental issue. It usually is talked about in terms of labor, in terms of foreign policy, but of course trade impacts the environment and climate. And so of course trade policy should come under the Green New Deal. And a thing that surprised me as being part of a Green New Deal was universal broadband access. I take fast, reliable internet for granted here in Norway, and I did in the US too. But that speaks to the things, that speaks to my own privilege, and that I don't realize that not everybody has the tools to access the programs and policies that would be part of a Green New Deal. And so the Green New Deal really forces you to confront what you take for granted, what everybody should have, and what we all need in order to make this future more just. So again, this is, I'll keep going through the slides, but maybe take a minute and write into what the chat box or the Q&A what you were surprised by under this umbrella or what you think is missing. Because everybody here has ideas about this programs. I see we have verifiable information about for consumers. I agree with that as well. We need to know what's greenwashing and what's actually making a difference. I'm reading the Q&A and the chat at the same time. This is why you're seeing me look back and forth. Okay, you can go to the next slide. So the Green New Deal is described by one of its authors as a massive system upgrade for the economy. And we know the economy isn't working for the vast majority of people. We know that inequality is increasing, that we're outstripping planetary boundaries on a daily basis. Diseases like COVID-19 are actually evidence of that. When we encroach on wildlife habitats, it's easier for viruses to jump from animals to people. And so this will keep happening. We've been warned about it. And we know that people are being left behind domestically and internationally. And we know that climate change is obviously here, and all of the inequalities intensify and multiply those issues. So the original New Deal was trying to revive a desperate economy and create a new one. And it succeeded in some places, but it failed in some places. People of color, women were often left out of those benefits, and those ramifications are still present today in the current economic system. So the Green New Deal says, okay, we did that once, we didn't get it quite right. We know that we have to do this better this time. So we are taking this knowledge and want to address structural inequality, and we're restarting the economy, we're upgrading it. So I thought now we would go into some details on just some of those programs and policies that would be part of this new economy. So not just the inspiring kind of lofty rhetoric around the Green New Deal, but what does it mean on the ground? I see another comment. Reparations and consideration at every level of the differential impact of environmental conditions on communities, not just rising waters, but poison soil and air. Yes, environmental racism has been and continues to be a huge issue in the US and worldwide. And so a Green New Deal has to center those communities and find the solutions that address those environmental issues while making those, while lessening those inequalities to try to bring everybody to an equitable basis. Next slide. Great, so we have some potential policies and programs. I know this is another text heavy slide because in addition to being an activist, I also am sometimes a policy wonk, and I find the Green New Deal policies to be quite exciting. But one thing I want to point out in all of these policies that you see here is that none of them are new. They've all existed as ideas in different countries, especially outside of the US, throughout history. In fact, the Democratic Party platform included a federal jobs guarantee until 1980. So we sort of know the tools that we have. We know some of the ideas that we have in order to phase in a Green New Deal and the things that we'll need to do. It's just a failure of political will and sometimes a failure of belief that we actually can do these things. But this was the discussion that took place before the session. There was a lot of talk about demand, and that's right. If you're demanding it, if you're dreaming it, then you need to be thinking it's already possible, it's already there. So as an example of some specific Green New Deal policies that already exist in part and could be scaled up, and just to be clear, I didn't make these up. These are available in various candidates' platforms. These are available in various analyses, in policy proposals. You can find these anywhere you want if you're doing some research on the Green New Deal. But for example, in New York, there's already low carbon amenities and programs that could be upgraded and expanded and put people to work doing them. And that's things like improving public housing, that's restocking and rebuilding libraries, that's making public transit more accessible and more useful to where people actually are and where they're going. It's renewing parks and green spaces. A Green New Deal could sponsor similar improvements in cities across the country that make them all more greener and more equitable. We just need the political will, also the funding. The Green New Deal would provide good, high-paying alternative jobs, alternatives to low-paid work that do not provide worker benefits, work that's bound up in carbon-intensive supply chains. So I'm talking about fast food jobs, online monopolies, mega stores. These are often the only employment available in many communities, and they're carbon-intensive and they don't lift people out of poverty. We could put people to work doing things that we need, like restoring wetlands, making and installing rooftop solar in worker-owned collectives, installing them on these new revitalized public housings. All of this is instead of increasing carbon pollution. And so I wanted to end this slide with a quick note about a failure of imagination. I once was having a conversation with a colleague and they said to me, I don't think anybody should be able to own power. Now, they were talking about electricity, but it kind of blew my mind. It was a system that I had always accepted. I had paid my bills to. I had even been organizing against the utility and energy companies. And they just said, no one is allowed to own power. It should be free. And so I have to remind us all to challenge ourselves and think outside of the system that we currently exist in, because that's really the only way to change it. And I know that doesn't happen overnight, but when we change the framework, it is easier to think about this dream. Next slide, please. So just in that spirit, I put up a quick exercise in reframing that thinking and imagining. So interrogating what we mean when we talk about the economy. What do we say? What does it imply? And who do we want it to mean? Who and what should be at the front and at the center, and how do we do that? And how do we change what our values are? So this is every time you read an article and it mentions GDP or the economic losses from COVID-19, think about what it really means and think about what it should mean, what you want it to mean. Next slide. So I like to do, or I was hoping now we're at the midpoint and we could do a Q&A now. I know people like to wait till the end, but I don't want to miss any questions that might have come up in just talking about all those policies. So I'll take a couple minutes now and answer questions in the chat or in the Q&A. Let's see in both. So I'm just going to read first. We have from Connie. While the Green New Deal is not legislation, how could it get done without legislation? And then would it need federal legislation, or could each state write its own? Great question. The answer is both. The Green New Deal could be legislation that was passed at the federal level and or at the state and local level. New York State has a really ambitious clean energy law. Virginia has a really ambitious clean energy law. So these things can be done locally. Even towns can do state solar mandates. Somebody earlier was talking about the renewable portfolio standards. Those are all state-based. Town councils can pass policies about solar. Certain cities have banned fracking. Cities can start job training programs. So there's really like no limit to the imagination here on how a Green New Deal policy gets implemented, as long as it has the right principles, obviously funding if that's necessary, and who it centers. But when things can't happen or aren't happening at the federal level, it's even more important that they do happen locally. And I think we've seen that in the past almost 4 years now, since the Trump administration sort of stalled or is reversing many of the environmental programs of the earlier administrations. I hope that answers the question. And then we have one in, we talked about reparations. In 2008, Van Jones published The Green Collar Economy that focused on the benefits of new job creation for those whose jobs in obsolete sectors would disappear. Unfortunately, he had to resign from Obama's White House and his ideas forgotten. What is necessary to ensure the next Democratic president makes this a priority? Ooh, another good question. This was also mentioned before by people in the previous discussion, but we need to be noisy. You need to demand it. I'm paraphrasing a quote, which is that power concedes nothing without a demand. But that's true in terms of these environmental policies and job programs as well. They will not be handed to anybody, Democrats, moderates, independents, democratic socialists. They must be demanded from leaders at all levels. And the policies themselves have to be interrogated and make sure that they're equitable, not just as they're proposed, but as they are implemented. So it's being loud. It's making sure that whatever candidate you're working for or against hears from you and your community on the issue. If green jobs is important, make sure you're out organizing, asking staff about it, digitally making your voice known, since you can't do it in person right now. And if and when these people are elected, make sure they're hearing from you about it. Make sure your current elected officials are hearing from you about it. I know that just yesterday, I believe, or maybe it was the day before yesterday, Biden made an announcement about some more progressive climate policies that he was at least considering. And that's due to organizing. That's due to the refusal of progressives to be, refusal of them to be quiet about a Green New Deal, about the climate policies that they want to see. We have any other questions now about the Green New Deal? Don't see anything. Angela or Anna, if I miss, okay, we have a question from Bruce Murray. Can you talk about how environmental policy change could become exponential, moving from small, slow change to big, fast change? Current response to coronavirus might be an example. You are absolutely right. The next part of my presentation is actually about a green and just recovery from the coronavirus. So I will say briefly here that unfortunately, what looks like and has been sort of slow incremental change is the result of asking for large changes, but not really acknowledging the scale of the issues that we're facing. And so even what seemed like a massive change 2 years ago, we know just isn't good enough anymore. So it's a question of framework. It's a question of what is necessary. But the sort of goalposts are moving so quickly that even what was a big change isn't anymore. I know that's a bit of a disappointing answer. So I guess in my opinion, at least, the way you get exponential, big, fast change is disruptive moments like the virus. Like we have the government now putting out $1 trillion spending packages. That is the type of investment you need in a green and just recovery. That is the only thing that gets the type of investments and thinking and policies and programs moving, is when everybody dreams of it at the scale it will happen. So that's one piece of it. The other piece is that you have to have mass demand for it. And you talked at the first video about individual choices versus systemic change. And it's been bouncing up in these discussions today so far, which is that driving an electric car is great. Taking your reusable bags to the supermarket, I'm never going to tell anybody not to do that. But that doesn't excuse you from demanding the systemic change that you need. As long as you are taking your reusable bag, but also demanding that ExxonMobil be held accountable for knowing about climate change for 40 years and funding a campaign to sow doubt about the science. As long as you are demanding that subsidies to the fossil fuel industry be ended and redirected back to jobs training for people that are going to lose their jobs. It has to be both. Nobody is off the hook from demanding these changes, and everybody should feel like they are empowered to demand them. So I hope that helps, but it's no easy thing, and there won't be one moment that moves us to big, fast change. It will be a movement. Other questions? People will question the cost of this. What are economists saying? Well, everyone is saying, since the Green New Deal was put out, they are saying how expensive it would be, this many trillion. And so this isn't a novel response by any means. It will be very expensive, but the government found $50 billion to bail out airlines in response to the coronavirus crisis. If they can find $50 billion for airlines, they can find $50 billion for Green New Deal policies. If people can stay home and fundamentally change the way they do business for coronavirus, they can stay home or fundamentally change the way we do an energy system for climate change. It is a matter of will, and it's a matter of collective response to a crisis. And talking about the cost, I think, sort of presupposes there's a cost at which it can't be done. We should, yeah, I see Will is kind of answering I have 2 chat windows open here that I'm looking at, but yes, I agree with you. Just in case people aren't seeing this, economists never seem to find a way to include the cost of lives, lost lives, stunted futures, and misery. So cost is another question that gets back to the terminology we talked about when we talk about economics and GDP. You know, what are we really valuing? Is it profits? Is it infrastructure? Is it people? Is it livelihood? Is it sustainable lives and a livable planet? It will be expensive, but it will not be as expensive as doing nothing, which is what Anne is saying to everybody. So this is a good echo chamber. I like when everybody reinforces what we already know to be true. So I think we can go to the start of the next slide. Yes. So this is a quote that was sort of remarkable to me because it was in the Financial Times. Now, it was an op-ed, but the Financial Times is not known for being just like a hippie rag. It's the Financial Times. But there was an op-ed about how we will come out of this crisis and what the opportunities are. And so some of you may have seen it, but if you didn't, I just thought it was a good way to transition into what are we going to fight for and how are we going to do it as we look at ways to demand a just and equitable recovery. Chat boxes are covering my screen, I apologize. So you can go to the next slide. So the challenge we face, which we've talked about a bit in the Q&A, is that we're facing a really unprecedented situation right now that is exacerbating all of the problems that were there with climate change. So while I feel personally incredibly lucky to be, and a little bit guilty to be in a country that currently has a competent government that citizens trust, a robust public healthcare system, a social safety net, a lot of those things just aren't available to people right now. And unless we demand a massive people-centered, green, and just recovery from COVID, we run the risk of just going back to normal. Now, I know we see the protests in the US of people demanding that the economy open up and we go back to normal. And while I fundamentally disagree with those protesters, I know that we've all thought to ourselves, I wish we could get back to normal life. When are things going to go back to normal? But we have to acknowledge that back to normal isn't good enough anymore. It means the same wage stagnation. It means economic inequality. It means no protections for workers. And it means exploding carbon emissions, environmental racism, and exploitation of frontline communities. Inequality has made normal impossible for too many people. Next slide. So what we need is a green stimulus. And the Green New Deal sort of sets a path for this, but now we have the chance to actually create some of those programs that the Green New Deal envisions. And we need a stimulus that specifically takes into account a response to climate change and environmental issues. So one statistic from Dave Roberts, actually, who was featured in the Vox video with the chimney and the dog, he wrote that shutting down the entire global economy, as we're doing mostly right now for the coronavirus, will produce about a 5% drop in greenhouse gas emissions this year. That's the estimate. To hit the 1.5 degree temperature target set in the Paris Agreement, global emissions would have to fall 7.6% every year for the next 2 decades. So even though we think that this economic shutdown is a massive change in carbon emissions, we're not even close to where we need to be. So we need to think about that when we talk about the type of recovery, the type of programs, the type of change that comes in a green stimulus. Next slide, please. These key strategies are part of a down payment on a regenerative economy, and that is from the experts who have been writing what a green and just stimulus would look like and envisioning how you would start to implement the programs that we need. So these 4 pillars are a little bit oversimplified for what the strategies would be for this down payment on a regenerative economy. But it's important because they are intersectional, like the Green New Deal. They bring together labor, economics, environmental, and social policies and the investment necessary. So the stimulus that is being discussed is already in the trillions in the US and globally. And so that's the system upgrade that we need. That's the type of investment that will pull together the recovery that brings us out of coronavirus, but also into this green new future that the policymakers are envisioning. Next slide, please. So these are very, very high level, this one and the next slide are very, very high level policy and programmatic ideas that would come under a green stimulus. You let me indulge on policy wonk talk before, so I won't do that for you now. And I invite you to look around the internet, look around the speeches that have been given about what might come under a green stimulus. I will just give you 2 of the ideas that I find the most exciting and probably most relevant to us as Democrats abroad. So one of the programmatic areas is green foreign policy. And the way that's been described is to make green technology, industry, expertise, products, and services a major export of the United States with the aim of becoming the undisputed international leader in helping other countries transition to completely carbon neutral economies, bringing about a global Green New Deal. Now, I know that US foreign policy is not without its issues, but I think that being the world leader in enabling other countries and investing in other countries to transition to a low carbon economy is far better than energy dominance or the other disappointing policies that come out of the current administration. And I think it's important for the US to address its historic responsibility for carbon emissions, for environmental injustice, and this goes a long way to do so. And so this could come under a green stimulus. It's not necessarily just about environmental issues. It gets at labor, it gets at infrastructure, it gets at trade. And this is the type of systemic change we need to think about. I see that people are asking a lot of questions, so I don't want to spend too much time, so we can skip to 2 slides ahead. Right, so I've been a little bit of a broken record on this, I hope, because it's so important. And so this is the sort of principles for making or starting to make the COVID recovery green and just. And so it has to center vulnerable populations. It has to address systemic inequality. It has to really center public service as public goods, education, healthcare, transport, green spaces, cultural landmarks. These have to be made accessible to all people. And we have to really conceptualize them as being for all people. And we have to rethink about who should be at the center of the economy, this new system, not corporations, but people and communities. And so I thought very quickly I would just tell you some of the demands that Black Lives Matter have put forth in their coronavirus demands to show what marginalized communities are asking for. And that is a moratorium on evictions and utility shutoffs, a relief package for emergency food and shelter, and immediately legislate fully paid sick leave for all workers. So this is what we mean by green and just. It can't just be about climate and it can't just be about economics. It has to bring both together. Next slide. So how do we get there? How do we achieve even some of these things that are in a green and just recovery and a Green New Deal? I am giving this presentation on behalf of, or for, not on behalf of, but for Democrats abroad. So I am contractually obligated to say that we need to vote. That is a joke, but it really goes without saying. Voting is the floor of what we do. Voting is not how you build, gain, and keep power, but you must do it in order to impact the things that you can impact immediately. After you vote, you hold those you voted for accountable. Call them, email them, fax them, tweet videos at them, tell them what you want to see in a just recovery, and get your family and community to tell them as well. Get involved. Democrats abroad need your help. You can jump in by giving a presentation such as this. Just pulling an example out of thin air. You can join the calling team that was discussed earlier in the chat, and I believe there'll be other opportunities presented later during this marathon about how to get involved with Democrats abroad. Donate if you're able. Right now, there's people that are suffering very, very deeply from this crisis and from the economic and environmental crises that existed before COVID. So if you have the ability to do so, I encourage you to take that action. And if you need to ask for help, you should also feel free to do that. We are truly in this together. Normally, I would tell you to get involved with a local group, to knock doors, to go to a meeting, to go to a protest, or to volunteer with a group. That's not possible right now, but it is possible to do online. There are many opportunities for you. Letter writing, virtual calling, virtual organizing. There's a lot of resources out there. And if you want specific ideas, I don't want to promote any one organization over another during this, but I would be happy to provide people with resources depending on what your specific interest is. But you all have skills and knowledge that you can put to work getting this green and just recovery going. Some of you might even have specific job training to offer people. There is a place for you to make this a reality. So final slide. I know we're supposed to do a little more Q&A now, but I hope that it can be focused on actually people committing to what they are going to do to make this a reality. So I'm hoping people will be willing to write into the chat box what they are doing or what they plan to do, and sharing that with others to maybe inspire them or get something going right as a result of this presentation. It's been my pleasure to take this time with you. I hope that you came away inspired from it. I hope you feel committed to making this a reality. I thank Angela and Anne again for giving me this opportunity. And I am excited to get back to work. So I will open the chat box up to answer people's questions or have them say what they're going to do.
Okay, that was a great presentation. Yeah, it was really very interesting. I'm sure we have lots of questions. I was just sort of checking out Facebook, and we're getting a lot of comments, more comments than questions.
Oh, hopefully positive.
Yeah, definitely. No, okay, there was one negative comment, but it doesn't matter. That's Facebook.
That's fine.
Anne, are you gonna go ahead and lead?
I did want to make a comment. I want to mention again, I want to remind everyone that Naomi is our lead for the Global Women's Caucus Climate Action Team. She's a fountain of ideas and energy and expertise, and she has a pretty good team, and she could really use some more volunteers for the team, people who are really ready to work. She's coordinating with our GWC candidate information team, which is focused on identifying wonderful, mostly women candidates who are also green as well. So you can get in on that side as well. But contact Naomi through my Women's Caucus email address, Women's Caucus at democratsabroad.org, and I'll make sure Naomi gets to you. Okay.
We have two questions in the chat. How do you think we got to a place in society where scientific evidence is met with skepticism and denial? Ooh. So this is a pet issue of mine because of the work I did in a previous role, which was about climate denialism and the specific industries that are responsible for it. And there is actually a direct line in both the people policies wording from tobacco denial right into climate denial and now COVID denial, although that is a beast of its own because of the internet and various social media platforms. But the tobacco industry was the first to say, no, cigarettes are great for you. And then it was, well, we don't know if they're bad for you or not. It's probably okay. And then it was, well, they're bad for you, but we're not going to tell anybody about it because we make a lot of money from tobacco. And that is essentially the same thing that happened with fossil fuels. Climate change isn't real. Well, it might be real, but we don't know what's causing it. Well, it's real, but the economy is too dependent on it to cut them off. So there's just nothing we can do about it. And we got to a place, I think I don't want to speak on behalf of Democrats abroad, but I think we got to a place in society because specific corporations funded massive campaigns to undermine science, to make people doubt, to buy off politicians, to make it impossible to rein in those industries. And so science denial and skepticism became an accepted way to respond to actual scientific evidence. And so there is a well-funded, well-organized, and traceable campaign. I encourage you to read Merchants of Doubt by Naomi Oreskes, another climate Naomi, which does an excellent job of tracing the history of skepticism and climate denialism and the organized campaign behind it. So today we share Earth Day with our students. What do you think about students' involvement? I think it's fantastic. We love when young people get involved. I believe my mother is somewhere in the audience on this, and if she could talk right now, she would share my my activism as a student, which often involved her driving me to various places and having to help buy poster board, etc. But anyway, getting your students involved is critical. Young people are so much more informed than we were a couple decades ago about environmental issues, about intersectionality. It's so inspiring to see how committed they are to environmental activism and to understanding the intersectional issues there. So I think the more that you can empower them, the more you can tell them that yes, their voices matter, yes, they should speak up, and they can do everything from going to one of the Fridays for the Future marches. If they don't feel comfortable with that, they can make art, they can make phone calls, but definitely encourage their interest and their involvement, because their voices do matter. And this is the planet they're inheriting. These are the systems that they're going to be living with. So what do we have here? The UK, where I live, has an excellent climate researcher, business, startups. Should the Democratic Party make it a more explicit policy platform issue to collaborate internationally rather than only calling for the US to be an international leader? There are echoes of MAGA in that message, in my view. That's a really nuanced point, and it's a very good one, and I appreciate you bringing it up. International collaboration is crucial, and the US cannot go this alone. That's sort of what got us into this mess, is individualism by countries, if you will. This is a collective action issue. Emissions from one country, pollution from one country does not stay in another one. And so we would love to see more collaboration among all countries, but especially the US in the international arena on a global Green New Deal. So I completely agree with you. Any other, ooh, I'm just looking at the chat box. I'm sorry, I ignored the Q&A box, I think. Are there further questions there? Okay, I don't see more questions unless, Anne, am I missing anything? Has something not come up?
No, I think that's, I think you've got them all.
Great.
I did have one small question about poor Dianne Feinstein, though, that you mentioned when you were speaking about students getting involved. I would like, you know, Dianne is my senator, and she's fought long and hard, but she stands there and looks so bewildered with this small child looking up to her, and she says, we can't afford it. What do you think, if Dianne got a rerun, if she got a second chance, what do you think she'd say today after pandemic, after the trillions that we've invested? What would, give Dianne another chance, and what would she say?
Well, Senator Feinstein is welcome to call me up for some advice on how to go about being a better role model to the kids. But I mean, in all truth, this is one of those questions or one of those issues that's really just a failure of imagination. Dianne Feinstein, you know, a lot of public elected officials aren't pure good or pure bad. They have complicated policy reasons. And Dianne has been a senator, Senator Feinstein has been a senator for a long time. And the system that she knew didn't make it possible for something like the Green New Deal. Truly, there was just not the idea or the political will there. And so I think it was a failure of her imagination, but also a pragmatic response to something that she has been working on and in for decades. And so I hope that she would re-examine that in herself and in the caucus and in the party, and just say, maybe we do need to be a little bolder and bigger. I had in my notes to say that if we start out by compromising before we even ask, then we won't get it. We'll only get the compromise to the right. So we have to set the ask even farther than we think we could ever get, so that if and when we get something, it is further than we ever thought possible. So it's a failure of imagination. It's a failure of political will, but it can be combated by showing that another world is possible.
Very well said. And I hope that we give her another chance.
Yes.
Angela, what's next?
Well, thank you very much, Naomi. Your presentation was wonderful. We got a lot of great comments on Facebook and in our Zoom chat.